Your sister Victoria is successful and responsible, unlike you, Ivy. My father Richard raised his wine glass across our dining table in Portland, Oregon, his words slicing through me like broken glass. I watched Victoria's perfectly painted lips curve into that smug smile she'd perfected over 28 years of being the golden child. Before we continue, if you're ready to watch revenge served ice cold, hit that like button, subscribe to Formidable Revenge channel and comment below where you're watching from. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Victoria looked flawless as always, draped in designer labels that screamed wealth. Her Cartier bracelet caught the candlelight as she tucked a strand of highlighted hair behind her ear. Victoria climbed the corporate ladder through pure determination, Richard continued, oblivious to the bomb I was about to detonate. Not like your freelance nonsense, Ivy. Look at her penthouse, her Mercedes, her wardrobe. She's completely self-made. I carved into my herb-crusted salmon, keeping my face blank. 2 years of these performances had trained me well. 2 years of watching Richard parade Victoria around like a trophy while dismissing my work as worthless computer tinkering. She's making real money in corporate retail, he went on, his voice dripping with pride. Not like Ivy hiding in her apartment playing with websites all day. Victoria practically glowed. Thanks, Dad. Financial independence feels incredible. I've worked so hard for this. I nearly choked on my water. Financial independence. The same woman who'd texted me 4 days ago begging for an emergency $5,000 transfer to cover her credit card minimums. The same woman whose independence cost me $4,500 every single month for 24 months straight. I set down my fork with deliberate precision. Perfect timing, actually. Since Victoria's so successful and independent now, she won't need my monthly transfers anymore. The words detonated like a grenade. Victoria's smile vanished, replaced by pure terror. Her champagne flute froze halfway to her lips. Richard stopped chewing mid-bite, his eyes narrowing in confusion. What did you just say? His voice dropped to that dangerous register I knew too well. I said Victoria won't need the money I've been sending her every month. I kept my tone casual, conversational, like I was discussing the weather. Since she's so wildly successful and all. Victoria's face drained of color faster than wine from a broken bottle. Ivy, we agreed. Agreed to what? Richard's fork clattered against his plate. What money? The dining room felt vacuum-sealed, airless. I watched Victoria's carefully constructed world begin to fracture. Watched her calculate how much she stood to lose when her house of cards finally collapsed. 2 years. 2 years of funding her fantasy while she stood by silently as Richard used me as his cautionary tale of failure. 2 years of her accepting credit for a lifestyle my bank account made possible. The golden child was about to fall, and I was the one holding the scissors to her safety net. My name is Ivy Lancaster and I'm 34 years old. While my family sees me as the disappointing daughter who never launched, I've been quietly building an empire from my modest downtown Portland apartment. Summit Gear Direct. My e-commerce business started as a side hustle 4 years ago. Now it's a 7-figure operation selling premium outdoor equipment through multiple online platforms. I source high-quality hiking and camping gear from manufacturers nationwide, undercutting big-box retailers by 30% while maintaining superior quality. Last year alone, I pulled in $820,000 in revenue. After expenses and taxes, I cleared $425,000 in pure profit. My customer retention rate hovers at 87%, and my reviews average 4.9 stars across all platforms. The bitter irony burns. While Richard dismisses my computer hobby, I earn more in 6 weeks than most people see annually. But I've always been private about success. I dress in jeans and vintage band tees, drive a dependable Subaru Outback, and live in a comfortable but unremarkable apartment. Money never meant status to me, just freedom. Victoria, meanwhile, has always been about the performance. At 28, she manages a luxury boutique in the Pearl District, earning maybe $48,000 annually. Respectable, sure, but nowhere near the executive position Richard believes she holds. 2 years ago, she showed up at my apartment sobbing, mascara streaking down her face. Credit card debt had buried her alive. Her downtown penthouse rental was bleeding her dry at $3,200 monthly. Her Mercedes lease cost $780. Designer purchases to impress her wealthy friends had maxed out 4 credit cards. I'll pay you back with interest, she'd sworn through tears. I just need help until my promotion comes through. Dad can't know I'm drowning. Being the older sister, I felt protective despite our complicated history. I agreed to transfer $4,500 monthly to cover her shortfalls. Temporary assistance while she got stable. That was the agreement. Instead, Victoria weaponized my generosity. She upgraded to an even pricier penthouse, expanded her designer wardrobe, and started curating this Instagram-perfect life. She convinced our extended family she was thriving in corporate America, carefully hiding where her money originated. Meanwhile, Richard continued his tradition of comparing us at every family gathering. He'd praise Victoria's business savvy and independence while dismissing my work as a phase I'd eventually outgrow. Ivy needs to find real employment, he'd tell relatives at Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, any occasion that gathered witnesses to my supposed failure. Victoria's the responsible one. She's actually making something of herself. The worst part, watching Victoria nod along with these comparisons, never once acknowledging that her entire lifestyle was subsidized by the sister Richard constantly criticized. She'd gotten comfortable with the lie, comfortable letting me bankroll her image while harvesting all the glory. Tonight was supposed to celebrate Victoria's latest promotion, another fictional achievement in her elaborate mythology. Instead, it became the night I burned her world down. The silence stretched like taffy. Richard set down his wine glass with trembling fingers, his eyes locked on mine with an expression usually reserved. For discussing my disappointing life choices. Ivy, explain what you mean by monthly transfers. Each word came out measured, dangerous. Victoria shot me a desperate look that could have stopped traffic. Dad, it's not $4,500, I interrupted, my voice clear as crystal. Every month for 24 months. That's $108,000 total, covering Victoria's penthouse rent, Mercedes lease, credit card payments, and shopping addiction. Richard's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Confusion, disbelief, then something approaching rage. That's impossible. Victoria makes excellent money in management. She makes $48,000 annually managing a clothing boutique, I said matter-of-factly. Which is perfectly respectable, but nowhere near enough to support the lifestyle you've been praising. Ivy, please stop, Victoria whispered, tears forming. But I was done protecting her performance. Her penthouse costs $3,200 monthly. The Mercedes is $780. Add utilities, insurance, credit card minimums, dining out and shopping, and she's been short roughly $4,500 every month to maintain the standard of living Dad's been celebrating. Richard turned to Victoria with growing horror. Is this true? Victoria's carefully applied makeup began running as tears spilled over. I was going to pay her back. I just needed time to get established. Established? Richard's voice rose. You told me you were promoted to regional manager last year with a $90,000 salary. I oversee 2 sales associates, Victoria admitted quietly, her voice cracking. It's not regional management. It's assistant manager at one location. The truth hemorrhaged out like arterial bleeding. For 2 years, Victoria had crafted elaborate stories about career advancement, fictional promotions, imaginary salary increases, fabricated bonuses that existed only in her imagination and Richard's proud retellings to neighbors and colleagues. So while I've been telling everyone how successful you are, Richard said slowly, his voice shaking, how independent and responsible you are, you've been living entirely off your sister's charity? The sister I've been telling everyone needs to get her life together. It wasn't charity, Victoria protested weakly. It was a loan. A loan implies repayment terms, I corrected. A loan has interest rates and end dates. What you had was an indefinite allowance from the sister Dad uses as his example of irresponsibility. Richard turned to me and something shifted in his expression. The usual disappointment and irritation had evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. How much money do you actually make with your computer work? He asked the question quietly, like he was afraid of the answer. I'd never planned to reveal this information. I'd been content letting them believe their comfortable fiction. But the moment demanded honesty, and I was done protecting everyone else's delusions. Last year, Summit Gear Direct grossed $820,000 in revenue, I said calmly. After expenses, taxes, and reinvestment, I cleared approximately $425,000 in profit. The number hit Richard like a physical assault. He fell back in his chair, staring at me like I'd suddenly started speaking Mandarin. Victoria was openly sobbing now, watching her carefully constructed identity disintegrate in real time. Richard's wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against his dinner plate. The crash echoed through our suddenly suffocating dining room as he processed what I'd just revealed. 820,000, he repeated numbly. That's gross revenue, I clarified. But yes. And Victoria, before you spiral further, I'm canceling tonight's automatic transfer. I pulled out my phone, fingers moving across my banking app with practiced efficiency. A few taps deleted the recurring $4,500 monthly transfer that had been funding Victoria's fabricated lifestyle for 2 years. There, I said, showing her the screen. Transfer cancelled. You're officially on your own. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the hardwood. Dad, you have to make her keep helping me. My rent is due in 6 days. I have credit card payments, car insurance, my gym membership. Sit down, Victoria. Richard's voice cut through her panic like a blade. You've been lying to me for 2 years. I wasn't lying exactly, she said desperately. I was managing perceptions. Managing perceptions? Richard's voice dripped with disgust. You told me at Christmas you received a $20,000 bonus for exceeding quarterly targets. Victoria's face crumpled. I knew you'd be disappointed if you knew the truth. So instead of honesty, you let me spend 2 years telling everyone that Ivy was the family disappointment? Richard stood up, his chair joining the chaos. While she was literally funding your entire existence? The irony was almost beautiful in its cruelty. While Richard held up Victoria as the model of success and independence, she'd been completely dependent on my financial support. Every designer outfit he praised, every luxury he bragged about to friends, every achievement he celebrated had been purchased with money from my supposedly worthless business. Ivy, please reconsider, Victoria begged, moving around the table toward me. I'll pay you back with interest. I'll get a second job. I'll do whatever you want. What I want, I said, standing to face her, is for you to stop performing a role you can't afford. What I want is for Dad to stop using you as proof that I'm a failure. What I want is honesty, but apparently that's too much to ask. Victoria's designer facade was melting. Her expensive makeup streaked down her face, and her silk blouse was wrinkled from stress. For the first time in years, she looked like what she actually was, a 28-year-old retail manager drowning in debt and delusion. But Dad thinks I'm successful, she whispered desperately. Dad thought you were successful, I corrected. Past tense. Now he knows the truth and there's no going back. Richard was pacing, running his hands through his graying hair. 2 years, he muttered. 2 years of bragging about Victoria's corporate ascent while dismissing Ivy's business as a hobby she'd eventually outgrow. It's not a hobby when it generates more income than most senior executives, I said quietly. He stopped pacing and looked at me with something that might have been respect or maybe just shock. What exactly do you sell? Premium outdoor equipment, I replied. Hiking gear, camping supplies, technical clothing. I have direct relationships with manufacturers across the country and distribute through my own platform plus Amazon, REI's marketplace and Backcountry. My customer base is adventure enthusiasts who want professional-grade equipment without luxury markups. Richard blinked slowly, processing. And this generates over $750,000 annually? More in some years, less in others, but consistently profitable. Yes. Victoria was scrolling frantically through her phone, probably calculating her monthly expenses and watching her world collapse in real time. I need specifics about your business, Richard said, settling back into his chair with new intensity. I want to understand exactly what I've been dismissing all these years. Victoria looked between us with dawning horror. She was realizing that Richard's attention had completely shifted away from her crisis and toward understanding my success. The success he'd spent years denying existed. I started Summit Gear Direct 4 years ago after researching the outdoor equipment market, I began. There's a massive gap between cheap garbage that fails after 1 season and luxury brands that charge obscene prices for marginal quality improvements. Most camping equipment is either disposable junk or status symbols priced for trust fund kids. Richard leaned forward, actually listening to me for perhaps the first time in my adult life. So I researched manufacturers, built relationships with suppliers who produce equipment for major brands but also do private label work. I created my own line matching premium brand quality at roughly 65% of their retail price. And people actually purchase this online? Richard asked, his skepticism fading into genuine curiosity. Dad, outdoor recreation is a $40 billion industry, I explained. People spend massive amounts on camping and hiking annually. The problem is most gear companies target either extreme athletes or casual weekend warriors. I focus on serious enthusiasts who want professional-grade equipment without the luxury tax. Victoria was hyperventilating now, her phone trembling in her hands as she scrolled through apartment listings she could actually afford. My average order value runs about $280, I continued. I process roughly 1,400 orders monthly across all platforms. My gross margin is about 42% after product costs but before marketing and overhead. Richard was calculating in his head. 1,400 orders times $280 is $392,000 monthly, times 12 months. That's closer to $4.7 million in gross revenue, I finished. But that was my peak year. Last year's numbers I gave you are more typical for sustained operations. The magnitude was finally penetrating Richard's understanding. He'd spent years treating me like an unemployed college graduate wasting time on the internet when I was actually running a multi-million-dollar operation. Where do you work from? He asked, his voice hollow. My apartment has a dedicated office, but most logistics run through third-party fulfillment. I manage inventory planning, vendor relationships, marketing strategy, customer service oversight, and financial planning. The physical shipping happens through a warehouse in Gresham. Victoria suddenly looked up from her phone, panic etched across her features. Ivy, my credit card minimum payments alone are $2,100 monthly. Without your transfers, I can't even make the minimums. I'll default. My credit score will be destroyed. Maybe you shouldn't have accumulated so much debt buying designer clothes to impress people who don't actually care about you, I suggested coldly. Or maybe you should have been honest about your situation instead of building a lie that required constant financial infusions. But what am I supposed to tell people? Victoria wailed. Everyone thinks I'm successful. My Instagram followers, my friends, the guys I date, they all think I'm this successful career woman. Tell them the truth, Richard said harshly. Tell them you've been living a complete fabrication funded by the sister you and I both dismissed as unsuccessful. The weight of revelation was crushing him. Every conversation we'd ever had about my career was being recontextuated. Every time he'd criticized my choices, every time he'd held up Victoria as an example, every time he'd suggested I needed a real job, all of it was now exposed as ignorant and hurtful. I need to call your Aunt Patricia, Richard said suddenly, his voice strained. Why? Victoria asked with dread. Because last month I told her that Ivy should follow Victoria's example and pursue traditional corporate employment. I told her Victoria's retail management position was proof that traditional careers were more stable and rewarding than entrepreneurship. My Aunt Patricia, Richard's younger sister, was a successful venture capitalist who'd always supported my unconventional path. She'd probably bitten her tongue raw when Richard made those comments, knowing exactly how misguided his perspective was. Victoria was spiraling into full catastrophe mode. She'd pulled out her laptop and was frantically searching for apartments within her actual budget. Look at this, she said, voice cracking as she showed us a listing. 480 square feet for $1,400 monthly, and it doesn't even have in-unit laundry or parking. Welcome to living within your means, I replied without sympathy. Richard was still processing the business details, his worldview crumbling. Ivy, when you said you worked from home, I pictured you in pajamas scrolling social media and calling it productivity. I never imagined you were running a legitimate enterprise. That's because you never asked, I pointed out, my anger finally surfacing. Every time I tried explaining what I built, you'd interrupt with advice about traditional employment and career ladders. You never actually listened. He had the decency to look ashamed. I thought I was helping. I thought I was steering you towards stability and success. You thought I needed to be more like Victoria, I said, my voice sharp. More like someone who lies about income, lives entirely on credit, and depends on family handouts while pretending to be independent. Victoria slammed her laptop shut. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Ivy. I was just trying to make Dad proud. By letting him use me as the family disappointment while living off my success? The anger I'd suppressed for 2 years was erupting. Do you know how many family gatherings I've endured listening to lectures about responsibility and work ethic while literally funding your entire lifestyle? Richard stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking our neighborhood, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I owe you an apology, Ivy. A massive, inadequate apology. It's not just about apologizing, I said. It's about recognizing that your assumptions about success and failure were completely backward. Victoria's traditional job title impressed you more than my actual financial achievement because it fit your narrow definition of legitimate work. Her position seemed more. He paused, searching for words. More legitimate? I supplied. More respectable? More like what you understand and value. He nodded reluctantly, unable to meet my eyes. That's exactly the problem, Dad. You valued appearance over substance. Victoria had corporate-sounding titles and wore business attire, so you assumed she was thriving. I work from home in comfortable clothes, so you assumed I was failing. You never looked deeper. Victoria was crying again, but these tears seemed different, rawer, more genuine. I never wanted it to spiral this far. I thought I'd get promoted or find a higher-paying position and eventually become truly independent. I thought I could make the fantasy real. For 2 years. I asked skeptically. You had 24 months to get stable. Instead, you spent even more lavishly. I kept thinking next quarter would be better, she sobbed. Next year would be my breakthrough. I kept thinking something would change if I just maintained the image long enough. The only thing that changed was your spending, I pointed out. Instead of using my support to get stable, you used it to justify spending even more recklessly. You treated my generosity like it was permanent, like it was your right. Richard returned to the table and sat down heavily. What happens now? Now Victoria figures out how to survive on her actual salary, I said firmly. And maybe both of you stop treating my career like a cute hobby I'll eventually outgrow when I get serious about life. What about the money Victoria owes you? Richard asked. Over $100,000. I'd been considering this question for months, running scenarios in my head. I consider it an expensive education. I'm not expecting repayment, but I'm also done enabling her fantasy. The Bank of Ivy is permanently closed. Victoria looked up with desperate hope in her eyes. So you're not angry about the money itself? I'm angry about the deception, I clarified, my voice hard. I'm angry about being used as the family cautionary tale while funding the exact lifestyle Dad was praising you for. The money was my choice to give, but the lies and humiliation weren't acceptable. Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quality I'd never heard before. Genuine humility. Ivy, I would like to learn more about your business. Not to criticize or offer unsolicited advice, but because I clearly don't understand what you've accomplished and I'd like to. I'd like to finally see you clearly. For the first time all evening I felt something crack inside my chest. Not breaking but opening. I'd like that. Victoria was staring at both of us, realizing she'd lost more than just financial support. She'd lost her position as the favored daughter, lost her image as the successful one, lost the lie she'd been living inside for 2 years. What about me? She whispered. What about you? Richard asked, his voice no longer soft with indulgence. You created this situation, Victoria. You lied to me, exploited your sister, and built a life you couldn't sustain. Now you face the consequences. But everyone will know I failed, she said desperately. You didn't fail at retail management, I said. You failed at honesty and integrity. There's a difference. Your job is respectable. Your choices were not. The truth was finally spoken and there was no taking it back. The dinner that was supposed to celebrate Victoria's success had become the funeral for her fabricated identity. 3 months later, I sat in my expanded home office, watching my bank account grow by $4,500 monthly instead of shrinking. The money I'd been sending Victoria was now funding my European market expansion, and the results exceeded projections. Victoria had moved into a cramped studio apartment 20 minutes from her boutique. She'd sold most of her designer wardrobe and jewelry at consignment shops to cover credit card payments and avoid bankruptcy. Richard told me she was working double shifts on weekends to make ends meet. The most satisfying part wasn't watching Victoria struggle with reality. It was watching Richard finally understand how catastrophically wrong he'd been about both his daughters. He called me weekly now, asking detailed questions about Summit Gear Direct. Not critical questions or suggestions disguised as concern, but genuine curiosity about how I'd built something successful while he was dismissing it as worthless. "I told Patricia about your real revenue numbers," he admitted during one call. "She laughed at me for 30 minutes straight." "Aunt Patricia always knew you were underestimating me," I replied. "She said she tried telling me multiple times but I wouldn't listen. She called me an arrogant fool who couldn't recognize success because it didn't match my narrow expectations." Richard's voice carried the weight of regret. She was right. The most dramatic consequence came when Victoria's carefully curated Instagram presence collapsed. She'd built a following of 47,000 people by posting photos of her luxury lifestyle, designer outfits, expensive dinners, her penthouse view. Her feed sold the narrative of a successful young professional living her dream life. Without my financial support, that content stream evaporated overnight. She could no longer afford the designer pieces that had been central to her aesthetic. Her luxury penthouse was gone, replaced by a space that didn't photograph well. Her expensive adventures became memories. Her followers noticed immediately. Comments shifted from admiration to concern to judgment. "Where did you go? Are you okay? Why did your life change so drastically?" Victoria tried maintaining the facade for weeks, posting throwback photos and recycling old content. But people started asking direct questions about her apparent lifestyle downgrade. The final blow came when a former coworker commented publicly, asking about the regional manager promotion that never seemed to materialize. Victoria's entire social media presence, built completely on fabricated success, became impossible to maintain. She eventually deleted her accounts entirely, unable to face the truth publicly. Meanwhile, Richard had begun telling people the truth about my business. It was awkward for him having to explain he'd been catastrophically wrong about both daughters for years. But he seemed committed to making amends by giving me the recognition I'd earned. "I'm proud of what you built," he told me during one of our conversations, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm ashamed that I couldn't see it when it was right in front of me, but I'm proud now. I hope that counts for something." Those words meant more than all the money I'd ever made. Victoria's transition proved more brutal than anyone anticipated. Within 7 months of losing my financial support, she'd been forced into credit counseling, unable to manage the debt she'd accumulated. The Mercedes was repossessed. Her remaining designer items were sold at deep discounts. She was left with barely enough furniture for her tiny studio. Richard faced his own social consequences when family members and colleagues learned the truth. He'd spent years criticizing his actually successful daughter while praising the one living on borrowed money and borrowed time. The revelation forced him to confront not only his favoritism but his fundamental misunderstanding of what constituted real achievement versus mere appearance. As I reinvested the recovered $4,500 monthly into expanding Summit Gear Direct into markets across Europe and Asia, I realized something profound. Richard's years of dismissive comments had become fuel for my determination to prove that success comes in many forms, not just the traditional paths he understood and valued. The greatest victory wasn't watching Victoria face consequences for her deception. It was witnessing Richard finally recognize and respect the empire I'd built while he was looking elsewhere. It was proving that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply allowing truth to speak louder than the lies that once defined you. And 3 months ago something unexpected happened. Victoria showed up at my apartment with a genuine apology. No manipulation, no requests for money. Just honesty about her choices and their consequences. "We're not close now, but we're talking. She's working 2 jobs and paying off her debt slowly. She's learning what I always knew. Real success isn't about appearances or approval. It's about building something genuine even when no one's watching." Richard retired from his principal position and now volunteers at a small business development center, helping young entrepreneurs avoid the mistakes he made with me, judging books by their covers instead of reading what's inside. As for me, Summit Gear Direct just hit $1.2 million in annual revenue. I'm expanding my team, opening a showroom in downtown Portland, and sleeping better than I have in years. Because the best revenge isn't just proving them wrong. It's building something so undeniably successful that the truth becomes impossible to ignore. And the lies that once haunted you become nothing more than uncomfortable memories of who you used to let others think you were. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button, subscribe to Formidable Revenge channel for more stories of justice served cold, and comment below where you're watching from. Your support means everything.